Spring of 2006. Balad Air Base, 68 kilometres north of Baghdad. The Joint Operations Centre runs 24 hours a day. The walls are covered in flat screens, drone feeds, signals intercepts, and a target deck of 378 names. Al-Qaeda in Iraq commanders, financiers, bomb makers, foreign fighter facilitators. The screens glow blue-white in the dark. Every few minutes, one of them updates. A drone loiters over a rooftop somewhere in the Baghdad belt. An intercept pops from the signals chain. An analyst flags a vehicle moving south on a road that wasn't in last night's pattern. The room doesn't stop. It doesn't empty at shift change. It absorbs the incoming and produces the outgoing. A continuous, self-feeding loop of intelligence, converted into action, converted back into intelligence. The man running the centre is an American three-star, Stanley McChrystal, the future commander of all forces in Afghanistan. Sitting beside him at the operations desk is a British two-star, Graham Lamb, who arrived from the United Kingdom 4 months earlier and has been pushing for something that hadn't previously happened: to sit on the same ops floor as the Americans and share targets in real time. By the end of 2006, the Joint Task Force kills or captures an average of 3 priority targets every 24 hours. The British contingent, 22 SAS, augmented by elements of the Special Boat Service, the Special Reconnaissance Regiment, and 18 UKSF Signals Regiment, numbers roughly 60 operators on any given rotation. The JOC at Balad is called the Death Star internally, not for the science fiction reference, because, in journalist Mark Urban's phrase, from inside it you could reach out and eliminate somebody. 20 miles south of the base, Abu Musab al-Zarqawi has 8 weeks left to live. He doesn't know it. The men who will kill him are working in the same building. The story of how that came to be isn't a story about the SAS being exceptionally hard men. It's a story about an institution that spent 30 years building an operational playbook in places most of the Western world had forgotten, arriving in an American war with doctrine that the Americans, despite vastly superior resources, didn't yet have, and being honest enough, eventually, to admit they needed it. Baghdad falls on April 9, 2003. Saddam Hussein goes into hiding. Coalition special forces begin searching for the weapons of mass destruction their governments had publicly guaranteed were there. They find none. SAS elements commit to Iraq as part of Operation Telic, oriented initially toward intelligence collection, reconnaissance, and the hunt for surviving members of the Ba'athist hierarchy. The mandate is shapeless from the start. In June 2003, the SAS element essentially rewrites its own job specification. Saddam has gone to ground. The immediate task, locating the senior regime figures around him, is dissolving in real time. On June 16th, G Squadron 22 SAS and B Squadron Delta Force jointly capture Lieutenant General Abid Hamid Mahmoud al-Tikriti, Saddam's personal secretary, ranked 4th on the American high-value target deck. A notable early success, and also the high watermark of the original mandate. In July, an SAS team performs a close target reconnaissance of a residence in Mosul, thought to contain Saddam's sons Uday and Qusay. British commanders push for the SAS to raid the building. Permission is denied. A combined US Delta Force and 101st Airborne Assault eventually kills both men. The SAS watch it happen on the feed. By August 2003, a truck bomb destroys the UN headquarters in the capital. The attack's signature isn't Ba'athist. It belongs to a network that didn't exist as an organized force in March, operates in September, and by 2004 kills more Americans per month than the conventional insurgency the coalition's planning had assumed would be the primary threat. Task Force Black, the American designation for the British Special Forces element within the larger joint structure, formally stands up in the early months of 2004. Its core is a Sabre squadron of 22 SAS, rotating on a 6-month cycle through the regiment's 4 squadrons. Supporting elements include companies from the Special Forces Support Group, SBS operators on rotation, the Special Reconnaissance Regiment, and 18 UKSF Signals Regiment. The British code name for the mission, which appears in secondary sources from at least 2005 as Operation Crichton, remains in use until the British withdrawal in May 2009. The task force is headquartered at a compound on the western edges of Baghdad that becomes known inside the joint structure simply as the station, though its operational gravity shifts progressively toward Balad. The Americans call the full combined joint structure TF-145 and later TF-88. Inside that structure, TF Black is the British element. TF Green is Delta Force. TF Blue is DEVGRU. TF Orange, the intelligence support activity, provides signals intelligence. The architecture is American. The British are embedded within it. In early 2004, a Sabre squadron assaults a house in Baghdad in an attempt to capture Zarqawi. They breach the building, find a booby trap, and withdraw, discovering from intelligence recovered at the scene that their target had left the premises shortly before the raid. He had been there. The cycle wasn't yet fast enough. Delta Force was created by Colonel Charlie Beckwith, who in 1962 spent a year on exchange tour with 22 SAS at Hereford. His observations from that year directly shaped Delta's original structure: the squadron system, the selection process, the emphasis on close-quarter battle as a primary competency. The Americans built their premier counter-terrorism unit on a British template. By 2003, both units traced their doctrine to the same building in Herefordshire. The question the following years would answer was which set of institutional iterations had evolved further in the intervening 4 decades. The SAS's advantage was specific and traceable. From the early 1970s onward, the regiment fought a counter-terrorism campaign in Northern Ireland that demanded a competency no conventional military unit is designed to produce: sustained, precise, intelligence-led targeting in an environment where the enemy lived among the civilian population. New British security forces were watching, had developed counter-surveillance routines, and regenerated continuously when individuals were removed. Broad area operations, arrest on suspicion, large footprint cordon and search produced limited results against that adversary. What worked, slowly and painstakingly, was precision. Building a detailed intelligence picture of the network from close surveillance, agent handling, and analytical discipline, then moving against specific individuals when intelligence was solid and exposure was minimized. A US Army monograph examining British counterinsurgency in Northern Ireland, published through the Defence Technical Information Centre, identifies the core of the British approach as the progressive development, across 3 distinct phases of the Troubles, of intelligence apparatus development and intelligence integration. The cumulative effect, after roughly 20 years of operational refinement, was an approach that treated the network as the target rather than the individual. You didn't arrest the man who placed the bomb. You mapped the network that built it, funded it, recruited the man who placed it, and would replace him if he was removed. Then you moved against the network simultaneously, at multiple nodes, faster than it could adapt. The unit that institutionalized this competency was 14 Intelligence Company, known inside the intelligence community simply as the Det. Established in 1972, trained by the SAS, the Det ran long-term covert surveillance on both Republican and Loyalist armed groups in Ulster. Its operators were recruited from regular army battalions and trained through a specialist course that prepared them for something most soldiers never face: the need to conduct close surveillance in an environment where the targets were specifically looking for surveillance. In Belfast and Derry, Det operators drove ordinary-looking cars through nationalist estates, sat in safe houses with camera equipment pointed at street corners, followed targets on foot through markets in civilian clothes. The institutional skill they built was about patience, the discipline to sustain close surveillance without triggering the target, and the analytical rigor to convert a face on a surveillance photograph into a chain that eventually reached the people building the bombs. Crucially, the methodology ran the analytical cycle in both directions: forward, from a known name through their contacts toward the network's edge, and backward, from a recovered device or a captured bomb component toward the supply chain, the financier, the logistician who moved the materials. That bidirectional analytical habit, built across decades of operational necessity in Northern Ireland, is exactly what accelerates the F3 EAD cycle when it's applied to AQI in Baghdad. When the Special Reconnaissance Regiment was formally established in 2005, it absorbed former DET operators directly. The SRR deploys as part of Task Force Black, the institutional line from 14 INT companies' close target surveillance operations in 1970s Belfast to the analytical cell at Balad in 2006 is unbroken. Personnel, doctrine, and methodology pass through a continuous chain. The SAS didn't arrive in Baghdad carrying transferred experience. It arrived carrying the actual people, in a new formation, who had built that experience by doing it. The Balkans in the late 1990s added a different dimension. During NATO's S4 and I4 operations in Bosnia, SAS teams executed arrest operations against war crimes indictees under sealed ICTY warrants. Operations requiring sustained surveillance of high-value targets in a semi-permissive environment, precise execution under political scrutiny, and careful management of exposure at every level up to cabinet. Targets knew they were being hunted. Some had personal security. The towns and villages where they operated contained people sympathetic to them. The institutional learning was about how to manage the gap between what an operation would achieve tactically and what it might cost politically. A gap that would define almost every decision made during the Iraq campaign. Operation Barras on September 7, 2000 added the third element. D Squadron freed British Army hostages from the West Side Boys militia in Sierra Leone, with cabinet-level sign-off obtained for a squadron-level direct action in a compressed time frame. The operation required building a precise intelligence picture of a fortified position. How many armed men, where the hostages were held, which entry points were defensible, then executing before the hostages could be moved. 111 men, 13 helicopters, a simultaneous assault on multiple positions at 06:16 in the morning. It worked. It demonstrated that the SAS could operate at the tempo the Americans would eventually need in Iraq, provided it had access to the intelligence that tempo required. By the time the 1st Sabre Squadron arrives in Baghdad, the regiment carries 30 years of operational learning that no military staff college has yet transcribed into formal doctrine. The problem is scale. The SAS knows how to build a target network from human intelligence, how to exploit captured material quickly enough to feed the following night's operation, how to maintain operational security across a sustained campaign. What it can't replicate is the sensors, the signals architecture, the drone coverage, the manpower, that an American war generates. McChrystal has the sensors. The British have the manual. Getting them to operate as a single system takes another year. Ahmad Fadil Nazal al-Khalela was born in Zarqa, Jordan, an industrial city 27 kilometres north of Amman, in October 1966. He grew up in a family of Bedouin background, 7 sisters, 2 brothers, a father described as either a retired army officer or a practitioner of traditional medicine. By his early 20s, he was a high school dropout, petty criminal and street fighter whose heavy drinking was well documented. His radicalization happened in prison. He was arrested in Jordan around 1992 after weapons and explosives were found at his home and sent to Al-Suwaka prison. A Jordanian journalist, Fuad Hussein, who served time with him, wrote later, "The prison left a clear mark on al-Zarqawi's personality, which grew more intense. He believed government officials were tyrants who should be fought. He memorized the Quran in full during his imprisonment and developed, through sheer physical intimidation, a form of authority over other inmates. He issued fatwas and called himself Sheikh. He stacked stones in buckets for weightlifting to appear more menacing to the men around him. King Abdullah II granted a general amnesty in May 1999. Zarqawi walked out of Al-Suwaka. Within months, Jordanian intelligence assessed him as involved in a plot to bomb the Radisson SAS hotel in Amman on New Year's Eve 1999. The plot was uncovered and he fled, first to Pakistan, then to Afghanistan, where he met bin Laden in Kandahar. Bin Laden provided seed money of $200,000. Zarqawi used it to open a training camp in Herat, deliberately chosen far from Al-Qaeda's established operations because his recruits would enter through Iran. The camp specialized in poisons and explosives. By early 2002, he was in Iraq. British intelligence assessed by March 2003 that his network had established sleeper cells in Baghdad ahead of the coalition invasion. He had positioned assets inside the coming war before it started. What Zarqawi built in 2003 and 2004 wasn't primarily a bomb-making operation. A letter his network circulated in 2004, intercepted by US forces, documented his explicit strategy. Provoke a Sunni-Shia sectarian conflict severe enough to make Iraq ungovernable, forcing American forces into a role that looked to Sunni populations like complicity in Shia domination. The suicide vest at the Shia shrine, the beheading of foreign hostages on video, the wholesale targeting of Iraqi civilians. These weren't acts of rage. They were a methodology with a political objective. Ignite a civil war so intense that neither the Americans nor the Iraqi government could contain it. In May 2004, CIA analysts confirmed that Zarqawi personally beheaded American contractor Nicholas Berg on a video distributed globally. In March 2004, AQI ran the first major suicide bombings against Shia pilgrims at Karbala and Najaf. In October 2004, Zarqawi formalized his arrangement with bin Laden, pledging bay'ah, formal allegiance. His organization became Al-Qaeda in Iraq, with Zarqawi named its emir. The network that didn't exist as an organized force in March 2003 was, 18 months later, the primary driver of a sectarian civil war the coalition hadn't planned for and wasn't equipped to stop through conventional means. In November 2005, his network bombed 3 hotels in Amman, Jordan, killing 60 civilians at wedding receptions. It was a strategic miscalculation. Popular outrage inside Jordan against a man who had been born there, who had now attacked Jordanians, drove the General Intelligence Directorate into intensive cooperation against him. The Jordanian intelligence contribution to the kill chain that would eventually close around him was partly a product of that attack. By May 2005, the US government had placed a $25 million reward on his head, the same amount offered for bin Laden. He was, on any operational assessment, the most dangerous individual in Iraq, and the primary item on McChrystal's target deck. Stanley McChrystal took command of JSOC in October 2003. His own words, delivered at the Naval Postgraduate School. "I was put in command of Joint Special Operations Command in October of 2003 and went over to Iraq." He had spent his career in Ranger and Special Operations assignments, served as Chief of Staff of Military Operations in Afghanistan in 2002, and arrived at JSOC to find an organization designed, as he later described it, for a very limited mission set. Now asked to run a sustained network targeting campaign against an enemy that regenerated faster than it could be removed. His response was structural. The intelligence architecture of JSOC, compartmentalized by agency, by unit, by clearance level, was the primary operational liability. Information that could be actioned was reaching operators too slowly because it moved through too many filters. McChrystal began dismantling those filters. At Balad Air Base, he shut down a detention facility that had generated abuse reports and established a new Joint Operations Center. CIA analysts, NSA linguists, drone operators, and special operations teams worked from the same floor, sharing intelligence the moment it moved. He later described recognizing that the secrecy and traditional approach hindered sharing to partners, and deciding the cure was to eliminate the secrecy. He called the transformed facility the Death Star. Unofficially, the name stuck. In 2003 and 2004, the British element operates in parallel with this machine. The barriers are institutional. American intelligence is more tightly compartmentalized than the British can access in real time. The permission architecture for British direct action moves slowly through London. When the Americans assault Fallujah in November 2004, D Squadron drives wagons to a rally point outside the city, ready to join Delta Force already in combat. A red card comes down from the British chain. They withdraw. The following September, 2 undercover SAS operators are captured by rogue Iraqi police in Basra and paraded on Iraqi television. Faces bloody, being read charges in Arabic. For hours, while the men are beaten and held, the command chain in London fails to reach the right people to authorize a rescue. Urban's account of the incident includes the detail, attributed to internal SAS sources, that one senior British general was rumoured to have turned off his mobile while playing golf. The SAS eventually goes in without clear authorization, smashing armoured vehicles through the prison compound and recovering both men. The political aftermath is significant. The unit is renamed Task Force Night. The name Task Force Black, having appeared in the press, is retired. This dysfunction is what Graham Lamb arrives to repair. Appointed Director Special Forces in 2005, Lamb carries a specific operational history. He commanded 22 SAS in the 1990s. He has Northern Ireland, the Balkans, and Sierra Leone in his record. His decorations, Knight Commander of the British Empire, Companion of St Michael and St George, Distinguished Service Order, mark a career built at the junction of political risk and military necessity. What Lamb understands, that the London command chain evidently doesn't at this point, is that the British element's operational effectiveness depends entirely on access to American intelligence. The SAS can clear rooms faster than Delta. It can't replicate the NSA's signals architecture or JSOC's drone coverage. Operational precision without intelligence access is a physical skill with nothing to aim at. The solution isn't liaison. It isn't coordination meetings or deconfliction calls. It's integration. The British Task Group headquarters physically co-located at Balad. Targets shared in real time across national lines. The analytical products of British intelligence work flowing directly into the American targeting cycle and vice versa. In mid-January 2006, Operation Traction deploys the Task Group Headquarters Group, senior SAS officers, intelligence personnel, the people who run the analytical cell, to the JSOC base at Balad. British and American operators begin working from the same screens, against the same target deck, sharing intelligence the moment it moves. The transformation isn't instant, but it's fast. A British officer quoted in published accounts of the period describes the adoption of the shared targeting methodology. Once we all embraced F3 EAD, which was relatively quickly. That line captures something important. The British didn't invent the acronym. The formal articulation of find, fix, finish, exploit, analyse, disseminate was shaped by Colonel Austin Scott Miller and presented to McChrystal by Colonel Bennett Sokolic in 2004. What the British brought was the operational instinct the acronym was trying to describe. The understanding that the operation doesn't end when the target is removed. It ends when the intelligence produced by the operation has been converted into the following night's target. That instinct had been built in Belfast. It worked in Baghdad. Lieutenant Colonel Richard Williams, the named SAS commanding officer who served alongside McChrystal during this period, photographed together with him by archival sources after a raid, drives the British push from inside the joint structure. The Times review of Urban's book summarises what Williams achieved across the preceding period. He had bludgeoned his commanders into getting the SAS fully involved in McChrystal's machine. That phrasing, bludgeoned, is precise. The political and bureaucratic resistance to full British integration wasn't resolved through persuasion. It was overcome through operational results that made the resistance untenable. By the spring of 2006, the Joint Task Force is producing results the war hasn't previously seen. General David Petraeus, commanding multinational force Iraq, states publicly in August 2008, "The SAS have helped immensely in the Baghdad area, in particular to take down the Al-Qaeda car bomb networks and other Al-Qaeda operations in Iraq's capital city." It's the most explicit public American acknowledgement of the British contribution the open record contains. The cycle that makes the Death Star work is called F3 EAD. Find, fix, finish, exploit, analyse, disseminate. NDU Press describes it as the F3 EAD architecture developed by the Special Operations community during counter-terrorism operations in Iraq. It begins as operational improvisation and ends up in Army Field Manual 3-60. The find, fix, finish triad has existed as a basic military concept for decades. The exploit, analyse, disseminate suffix is what turns it from a three-step process into a self-sustaining machine. A raid produces captured material, phones, laptops, documents, the product of tactical questioning. That material moves immediately to the intelligence cell at Balad. Analysts work through the night. The exploitation of the captured material generates a new target or a new surveillance requirement before dawn. Surveillance produces a fix, a time and a place where the target can be reached. The fix generates the following night's operation. Each raid feeds the next. The cycle has no pause built in for the network to reconstitute before the following night's assault begins. An academic analysis of the Baghdad intelligence cycle, published in a 2013 security journal, states the effect precisely. Pioneered in Baghdad and subsequently applied in Afghanistan, the speed at which data was processed and turned into actionable intelligence made it possible to launch several special forces raids on insurgents on a nightly basis. The increase in operational tempo, the analysis continues, helped JSOC defeat insurgent networks before they might organize themselves to make an attack. The British contribution to this cycle has a specific documented character. The SAS had been running a version of this logic in Northern Ireland for 2 decades. The institutional instinct developed across those years was to work backwards through the network rather than forwards from scratch. Start with the intelligence captured in the previous raid and trace backward. Who funded this person? Who recruited them? Who built their devices? Who else they contacted in the 72 hours before the raid? That backward trace compresses the time between operations and makes it harder for the network to adapt before the next hit arrives. The Grey Dynamics analysis of Task Force Black documents this approach directly. Rather than starting the cycle from find, identifying a target from scratch, the SAS would begin from captured intelligence. Use it to fix a time and place for the next target, then mount the finish. The exploitation preceded and generated the find. The cycle ran backwards through the target hierarchy. Operation Lightwater illustrates the machine in practice. In November 2005, 4 members of the Christian Peacemaker charity are abducted in the University District of Baghdad. Task Force Night launches Operation Lightwater, led by B Squadron. The operation runs raids on a near-daily basis, each producing intelligence that generates the next. 50 buildings raided, 44 of those raids conducted by British Special Forces, 47 individuals detained. 4 raids produce no actionable intelligence. On March 23, 2006, the SAS recovers British activist Norman Kember and 2 Canadians from a building in western Baghdad. The analytical chain that found him required 44 separate operations, each feeding the next. That's not a hostage rescue in any conventional sense. That's the F3 EAD cycle applied to a single target until it closes. The GCHQ-derived signals intelligence that runs into the Balad fusion cell adds scale the British element couldn't generate alone. GCHQ's relationship with British Special Forces in Iraq is confirmed across multiple public accounts of the deployment. An intelligence partnership that brought intercept analysis from Cheltenham into the same analytical effort as NSA product and CIA human intelligence. The Joint Intelligence Cell at Balad draws from all 3 simultaneously. As Naylor writes in Relentless Strike, his comprehensive history of JSOC, McChrystal had perfected the F3 EAD machine, and the process had become self-sustaining. One SAS officer's summary of what the campaign became, preserved in Urban's account, "We were beyond the martyrdom argument. It had become an attritional campaign. We had to take them apart." There is one number that functions, in published accounts of this campaign, as the most compressed proof of what the British element brought to Balad. 17 seconds. Room clearing time is measured from the breach of the door to the call of "secure" on the radio net. The moment the lead operator confirms the room is controlled and any threat neutralized. Picture what that looks like in practice. A door comes off its hinges, or a frame charge detonates and the wall simply opens. The lead operator is through before the debris settles. He isn't pausing to assess. He isn't waiting for suppression from the man behind him. He's moving on a line that his training has grooved so deeply it precedes conscious decision. A flashbang, if conditions require it, lands before entry. The room is crossed in a straight path. The corners are cleared in a sequence that's been rehearsed until it's automatic. The radio call follows. In a building with 10 rooms, the differential between one unit's standard and another's compounds at every door. Across a compound with multiple structures, which is the standard operational target at the height of this campaign, those seconds accumulate into a gap that isn't tactical but architectural. A slower standard doesn't just mean more time in the building. It means the alert moves through the network before the last room is cleared. Someone gets to a window. A phone is used. The following night's target knows to move. According to the best available published accounts, McChrystal's memoir, My Share of the Task, and Naylor's Relentless Strike, by the spring of 2006, the SAS had reached a room-clearing standard of approximately 17 seconds. The comparison figure for Delta Force in 2005 was approximately 22 seconds. Both numbers appear in those books. They aren't in the JSOC public record. They should be treated as the best available approximation from credible first-hand sources, not as formally documented measurements. 5 seconds doesn't sound like very much. Across 10 rooms, it's 50 seconds. Across a compound with multiple buildings cleared in sequence before an alert can propagate through the network, it's the difference between operational surprise being maintained and it being lost. McChrystal, in his memoir, acknowledges that the British operators had reached a level of close-quarter precision that American units had to deliberately work to match. The SAS's killing house at Stirling Lines near Hereford is where the standard is built and maintained. Live fire training, live ammunition, moving targets, instructors playing hostages in scenarios where a misidentified shot means a colleague is down. The SAS doesn't suppress and advance through a room. The standard infantry approach, slower and appropriate, where the priority is weight of fire over speed. It enters and immediately neutralizes. Every operator who goes through selection then spends his career training specifically for this, in a building designed specifically for this, at a tempo that no other training regime in the world quite matches. Decades of that specific training, and the operational tempo of Northern Ireland, followed by 2 additional decades of operations, produced a close-quarter precision that didn't emerge from individual talent. It came from institutional repetition at a volume and specificity the American system, with its vastly different training mix and broader mission set, hadn't matched. The 5-second differential is the quantified form of the 30-year institutional lineage. The analytical chain that ends Zarqawi's life begins in April 2006 in the Baghdad belt south and west of the capital. On the nights of April 8th and 13th, B Squadron 22 SAS conducts a series of operations near Yusufia under Operation Larchwood 4. 7 insurgents are killed. The targets are identified as foreign jihadists by intelligence from previous raids. The material recovered from those strikes gives the Joint Task Force a clearer picture of AQI's cell structure in the Baghdad area, and produces intelligence that the operational record confirms contributes to the targeting of Zarqawi. What that intelligence specifically contains isn't in the public record. What follows, it's. Zarqawi has a spiritual advisor. The man's name is Sheikh Abd al-Rahman. What the Joint Task Force does next isn't a strike, it's a watch. Assets are placed on Abd al-Rahman. Not for an hour, not for a day. 48 hours of continuous surveillance, tracking his movements, his contacts, his patterns. Analysts at Balad are processing the feeds in real time. Where does he go? Who does he meet? When does he deviate from routine? On June 7, 2006, the deviation appears. Abd al-Rahman moves. He joins a convoy that drives north from Baghdad into Diyala province, a route that surveillance assets track in real time. The convoy doesn't stop at any of the locations in the existing target pattern. It continues north into a village near Bakuba called Hibib, approximately 50 kilometres from the capital. It arrives at an isolated building. The building isn't on any known target list. A meeting is underway. The surveillance feed confirms the presence of the man the Joint Task Force has spent months finding. The decision to strike moves fast. 2 US Air Force F-16C Fighting Falcons are redirected. The US Air Force official statement, published June 9th, is precise. 2 US Air Force F-16C Fighting Falcons, supporting coalition actions in Operation Iraqi Freedom, dropped precision munitions near Bakuba, Iraq, on June 7th, killing Al-Qaeda's leader in Iraq, Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, and other terrorists. The munitions are a GBU-12 laser-guided bomb and a GBU-38 Joint Direct Attack munition. There's no ground assault. The decision is made that a ground element approaching the building would alert the meeting before aircraft overhead could. The bombs go instead. The safe house is destroyed. Zarqawi doesn't die in the strike. Iraqi police and US medics arrive at the site and find him alive, badly injured. NPR confirmed he didn't die instantly. He dies within minutes of being found. Lieutenant General Gary North, commanding US Central Command Air Forces, issues a statement. The death of al-Zarqawi and his accomplices is a tremendous success for the Iraqi people and the coalition forces in the collective fight against Al-Qaeda in Iraq. The attribution of credit for the kill chain is contested, and the contest is worth stating plainly. The American account emphasizes American signals intelligence and detainee reporting, the product of interrogations of captured AQI members, as the primary analytical drivers. A declassified NSA document from the Snowden archive describes intelligence and detainee reporting that led to the killing. The Jordanian General Intelligence Directorate, whose motivation had sharpened considerably after Zarqawi's network killed 60 Jordanian civilians in Amman in November 2005, provided human intelligence the American account credits as significant. A Los Angeles Times report from June 13, 2006, carries the headline, "We knew him. Jordanian spies infiltrated Iraq to find Zarqawi." The British contribution is documented at the level of Operation Larchwood 4. B Squadron's April raids produced intelligence that fed the broader targeting effort. Whether the surveillance of Abd al-Rahman and the tracking of the convoy to Hibib were substantially British-led, as accounts drawing on British side sources suggest, or primarily driven by American and Jordanian intelligence assets, isn't resolved in the public record. Urban's book, which the Sunday Times described as carrying obvious top access, attributes substantial British analytical contribution to the final stages. The American official account doesn't specifically credit British work at that level. The attribution dispute isn't resolved here because the public record doesn't resolve it. The bombs were American. The intelligence that found Zarqawi passed through multiple analytical chains, British, American, Jordanian, before it became a targeting solution. The exact proportions remain classified. What is clear, on June 7, 2006, the most operationally dangerous man in Iraq died in a building the Joint Task Force at Balad had found him. Zarqawi's death doesn't end the campaign. AQI reorganizes under Abu Ayyub al-Mazri. The organization survives, evolves, and eventually becomes what the world knows as ISIS. Task Force Night maintains its operational tempo through 2008. In spring and summer 2007, the SAS expands operations into Sadr city, taking significant casualties as it pushes into one of Baghdad's most contested districts. In April 2007, Task Force Night redirects focus toward Arab Jabor, where human intelligence has identified a substantial AQI presence. For the period May to November 2007, A Squadron's operational output, one of the few figures the operational record provides, stands at 338 individuals arrested and 88 killed. By March 2008, the Sunni insurgency has declined sufficiently that B Squadron begins targeting lower-level networks in Tikrit and Anbar province that Iraqi security forces are approaching the capability to manage independently. British Special Forces withdraw from Iraq in May 2009. Urban's figures, drawn from his reporting. In 6 years in Iraq, British Special Forces captured approximately 3,000 insurgents and killed around 350 to 400. The Telegraph's Sean Raymond, citing figures from the same reporting base, puts the combined British kill or capture total at approximately 3,500 across the deployment. These are journalist estimates, not declassified government figures. The precise totals remain classified. Urban's figures for the American component across the same period: up to 9,000 captured, roughly 3,000 killed. As he frames it, the American campaign was larger by a significant margin. The British campaign was smaller, more precise, and, at the squadron level, operating at a standard the Americans had to deliberately work to match. Urban records at least 9 SAS dead during the Iraq deployment, with dozens more wounded. The Elite UK Forces.info operational record documents individual moments. One SAS assaulter killed in a successful raid on a senior Al-Qaeda figure on September 5, 2007. One SAS soldier killed during an operation in northern Iraq on March 26, 2008. The London Gazette publishes Conspicuous Gallantry Cross citations, the second highest British military decoration for Special Forces personnel in Iraq across 2007, 2008 and 2009. 6 were awarded in this period for actions in Iraq. The operational specifics cited in those citations remain, for the most part, restricted. Lance Corporal Joshua Leakey's Victoria Cross, the highest British military decoration, was awarded for actions in Afghanistan, not Iraq. The operational tradition is the same. The theatre isn't. McChrystal is appointed commander of all US and international forces in Afghanistan in June 2009. He takes the architecture. The Joint Operations Centre model, the embedded intelligence analysts, the shared target deck, the F3 EAD cycle that converts that night's captures into tomorrow night's targets. These move from Iraq to Afghanistan as operating principles, not as lessons to be studied. Lamb retires from active service the same year. The architecture he helped embed at Balad doesn't retire with him. F3 EAD, which began as operational improvisation by the Joint Task Force in Baghdad, is subsequently written into formal American military doctrine. NDU Press describes it as the F3 EAD architecture developed by the Special Operations Community during counter-terrorism operations in Iraq. The Small Wars Journal documents its incorporation into Army Field Manual 3-60. It becomes the standard reference framework for Western Special Forces targeting, not in modified form, not as one option among several, but as the architecture itself. It applies in Libya, it applies in Syria, it applies in Mali. Every Western Special Forces command that has run a network targeting campaign since 2009 has run it using this cycle. The room-clearing standard that published accounts of this campaign place at 17 seconds is the benchmark against which close-quarter battle training is calibrated, at Hereford and at Fort Bragg. The Pentagon's partial declassification of its Iraq Lessons Learned assessment in 2017 concludes that the British contribution to the kill or capture campaign was operationally decisive at the squadron level, in a war the Americans formally owned. Frank Ledwidge, in Losing Small Wars, his 2011 examination of British military performance in Iraq and Afghanistan, argues that tactical competence at the Special Forces level couldn't compensate for strategic incoherence at the national level. The argument is accurate at the level it addresses. Urban's own book acknowledges as much. The Special Forces campaign successfully suppressed AQI without resolving the underlying sectarian tensions that produced it. The organisation Zarqawi built evolves into something worse. The violence returns in new forms. Both things are simultaneously true. The squadron-level campaign was effective on its own terms. The war it was embedded in wasn't. Ledwidge's argument sits alongside Urban's, not beneath it. Knowing the difference between those two levels of analysis is part of what the British brought to the ops floor. McChrystal retired in August 2010, following the publication of a Rolling Stone profile that ended his NATO command in Afghanistan. Lamb retired in 2009. The men who served under them on Task Force Black and Task Force Night are mostly still alive. The youngest are in their 40s, the oldest in their 60s. Most have never spoken on camera. The record of what they built exists in Urban's book, in Naylor's History of JSOC, in a partial declassification, and in a set of London Gazette citations whose operational specifics won't enter the public domain in most of their lifetimes. Delta Force was designed by Charlie Beckwith after a year at Hereford in 1962. He built what he had seen. 44 years later, the regiment that had served as the template was sitting on the same ops floor as its American counterpart, working from the same screens against the same target deck, clearing rooms in a time the Americans documented in their own accounts and subsequently worked to match. The Americans had the resources, the British had the playbook. 6 years in Iraq, at a tempo no Western Special Forces formation had previously sustained, the partnership held. It wasn't advertised. It rarely is. Subscribe for more stories like this.